So I'm Dr. Dan Maggs. I'm a GP. I work locally here in Warwickshire, and I have been a GP for about 3 years. But my specialist interest that I'm developing all the time is in weight management and type 2 diabetes, particularly from a diet and exercise perspective. So a GP literally stands for general practitioner. So we're generalists. So compare that to somebody who's working in a hospital. They may be a heart doctor, a cardiologist, a bowel doctor, like a colorectal surgeon, or a skin doctor, a dermatologist. And a lot of people think that a GP is just someone who hasn't specialised, but actually, whilst that used to be the case, and you used to be able to become a general practitioner straight out of medical school, it's actually a specific training program, and we're actually specialised to become generalists now, okay? And that is that we are there to treat and manage a range of common and chronic conditions, but also to be able to recognise and refer on when we see more serious conditions as well. Very common infections that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. That would be ear, nose and throat infections, chest infections, occasionally skin conditions, skin infections. The second probably most common thing is skin problems, so rashes and lumps and bumps over the skin. That's probably what makes up the majority of our work as GPs. So as a GP, we see a range of conditions, right from the very routine things right through to very serious conditions that we see on a regular basis. And one of the real challenges of being a GP is actually picking up the serious conditions from all the other stuff that we see. And that could be cancer diagnosis, heart troubles, signs of strokes, anything that people can actually walk into a GP surgery with is what we see, really. Diabetes is a term we use both for type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. There are different types, but they're much more rare. So most people will be familiar with type 1 diabetes. It often develops in childhood and adolescence. It's where the pancreas stops producing insulin. So it's fairly dramatic when it occurs, and people get very ill very quickly. Type 2 diabetes is different. Both share the diabetes name. It's both related to insulin, but it's where you have an increase in your blood sugar levels, particularly glucose in the blood. Variety of things. People have a certain amount of genetic susceptibility to becoming type 2 diabetes, to becoming a type 2 diabetic, and actually it runs in people, so it runs in families. So if your parents were type 2 diabetic, you're more likely to become a type 2 diabetic. But it's also very strongly associated with diet and being overweight, and that's because the underlying problem, one of the key underlying problems in type 2 diabetes is what we call insulin resistance. So insulin is a hormone which allows glucose to be taken up by the cells. And when that's functioning normally, that's great. So after a meal, your body shunts glucose into the cells, but because of things going wrong with our diet and becoming overweight, that process goes wrong, and you need more insulin to overcome the resistance and push that glucose into the cells. And that's one of the fundamental problems in type 2 diabetes. When the insulin is unable to shunt glucose insulin's unable to overcome that problem, the blood glucose levels rise. And it's the glucose levels rising that causes the problems. Our bodies are supposed to have a fairly tight control over blood glucose. But in diabetes, the levels have become out of control, okay? And that causes damage to all over the body. It causes damage to the nerves. People with type 2 diabetes lose the sensation in their feet and can get quite severe injuries to their feet, even without knowing it, which can become very badly infected. And we very frequently see people who have amputations because of type 2 diabetes. It has an effect on the kidneys. One of the commonest reasons for people being on dialysis is because they're of type 2 diabetes. It has effects on the eyes. One of the most common causes of blindness is because of what we call diabetic retinopathy, which is a disease of the back of the eyes caused by high levels of blood glucose. And the effects are all over the body, the heart, the brain. It's a true multi-system disease. The role of sugar in developing type 2 diabetes, I think, is one that we're really only starting to hear coming to the fore at the moment. Actually, sugar, common table sugar, or sucrose, as we also know of it, is actually two molecules. It's glucose and fructose in equal measures, and your body breaks it down very quickly into those two parts. Now, blood glucose we know about. We know that that's what can be taken up by all our cells. But fructose is the fruit sugar. We know it, we find it in lots of fruits and vegetables in various concentrations. But fructose is handled very differently by our body. Fructose is pretty much only used by the liver. And so if you take in half of glucose and half of fructose, most of the glucose is going to be used throughout the whole body, but that fructose is going to be used only by the liver. And the liver is going to turn that into either short-term energy stores or into fat to be able to store it for longer term. And if you're having large amounts of fat being produced by the liver because it's only the liver that's being able to handle this fructose, then it becomes very, very problematic for the liver. Now, the liver is supposed to take that and export it. But in this day and age, sugar is so easy to come by in our diets that actually the liver gets overwhelmed with the amount of fat that it's producing. And we start to get fat deposited within the liver. The liver does not like having fat in it. It doesn't like having too much fat in it. A little bit is okay as it's there shunting it out. But when we start to get fat developing in the liver, that's a problem, and we call it fatty liver disease. And if that's caused by diet and sugar intake, we call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But it's something that often people have heard about in relation to people who have drinking problems as well. But the liver doesn't like being fat. It doesn't like having fat in it, and so it starts to change and become resistant to the effects of insulin, and that causes elevated levels of insulin throughout the body. And so we start to see the intake of sugar being directly linked to the development of type 2 diabetes. And we've got really good evidence for this in animal models, in mice and rats and things like that. But it's also something that's very difficult to replicate in humans. But we start to see this strong correlation between people who have high sugar intake and fat in the liver and the development of type 2 diabetes. Heart disease is one of those common conditions that affects so many people. Heart disease, strokes, it's all part of the same family. And it's caused by a multitude of things. We all know smoking is a big cause of heart disease and strokes and things like that, and you can see it on any cigarette packet these days, as well as the cancer side of things that we all know about as well with smoking. But I think we don't really yet understand, or it's not widely publicised, the role that diet has in heart disease, and it all comes back to this cholesterol thing. Okay, we talk about cholesterol and that it's just good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, but actually when we dig deeper into that bad cholesterol, or the LDL, we find that it's different sizes of cholesterol. And when things are working normally, this is just energy being transported around your body. But when that process goes wrong, these particles of cholesterol become shrunken down and they actually hang around a lot longer in the body. And I think our current understanding is more around these small particles of LDL rather than total LDL being the problem. And it's that develops into the artery walls, causes what we call atherosclerosis, which is a narrowing of the arteries, and that can happen anywhere around the body, within the heart, within the neck, leading to blood flow going up to the head to strokes, and other conditions around the body. And when that becomes unstable and ruptures, that's when we get heart disease. So anything with itis at the end implies that there's some form of inflammation going on. Arthritis would be to do with the joints. Okay, so we've got multiple things that cause arthritis. Most commonly, what we often hear is osteoarthritis, which is age-related degenerative disease of the joints. We also have rheumatoid. People have also heard of things like rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition that affects the joints, which is quite different from age-related or degenerative arthritis. And there are multiple other different rarer forms of arthritis as well. So an autoimmune condition is where, for some reason, the body is attacking itself as abnormal. And it's a condition where there's multiple different autoimmune conditions within the body, but it's where something's gone wrong and your body's getting confused and it's attacking itself, and your immune system's going, hang on, that shouldn't be there, when it quite clearly should be there. And the body's getting confused, and often we have to give medication that changes how our bodies respond to that problem. So osteoporosis is a thinning of the bones, basically. It is where the bones lose their structural strength over time. Very, very commonly we'll see this after the menopause in women. Okay, which is why hip fractures, which are often as a direct result of thinning of the bones, at a very key position in the body in terms of where we carry our strength through our body, our weight through our body. We often see a higher rate of osteoporosis and hip fractures in older women after the menopause. I think very commonly when we think about mental health, we see what's maybe have been portrayed in the media as people who are mad, okay? But mental health is a wide range of different conditions, ranging from things where people are very disturbed, where they've really lost any grasp of reality and don't really have any normal ability to function whatsoever. It can seem like they're living in an entirely altered universe, okay? Whereas a lot of things we talk about in terms of mental health can be depression, anxiety, problems with people's moods, and that ranges from people who are feeling sad about something for whatever reason, through to people who are unable to function because those feelings have become significantly more severe. Sleep is a big passion of mine. First of all, I love to sleep, but it's something that's so neglected in modern day life. We're all busy, but sleep is something that's non-negotiable. You need as much sleep as you need. You can't run a sleep debt. You can't survive long term. Eventually, you will crash and suffer the negative influences of poor sleep. And actually, as we age, it becomes harder and harder to get good quality sleep just through changes in our brains as we age. So whilst as a teenager you might be able to get away with a slightly more haphazard approach to sleeping, as we age it gets a lot harder and we start to need much more routinized sleep in order to get what we need from sleep, which is restoration of our minds and a rest for our bodies. Stress is, again, it's something that's so common in our daily lives. We're all far more stressed than we used to be, and the question is, what is stress? What effects does it have on our body? And actually, stress is, I relate it back to stress being a normal response, okay? So take it back to ancestral times when you are being chased by a lion. Stress is a good thing in that situation, okay? Stress gets your body ready for that, and we've all heard of the fight or flight response with adrenaline. Well, stress can be a normal thing, but when stress becomes a long-term problem, all those effects that it's having on the body that would have prepared you for the fight or the flight in other times, it's having those effects on an ongoing basis. And those effects aren't meant to work on an ongoing basis. We're not supposed to have persistently raised levels of the hormones that are associated with stress. They're supposed to come and go as we need them. But if they're there all the time, we have a lot of problems in our body because of that. And actually, we know that people who have very stressful lives have a higher incidence of type 2 diabetes. And the reason for this is because cortisol, which is one of our key stress hormones, actually serves to mobilize blood glucose in the times of stress. We don't want that to be happening all the time. We only want that to be happening when we really, really need it. And so stress is something that we see very, very commonly, and it's something that we really need to take ownership of in order to improve our overall health. So I think it's the multivitamins for me are important because, in a perfect world we get all our nutrition from our diets, and that's great. But the way I see multivitamins is as an insurance policy. Yeah, maybe we don't eat an entirely balanced diet on every day. Maybe we don't get all we need from our diet every single day or over a period of days or weeks, then actually having a multivitamin just seems like common sense to me, that actually we're just topping up, and if the multivitamin's well balanced, then we should just be adding in things that maybe we're not getting optimum amounts of on a day-to-day basis. So for me, it just seems like a really obvious thing to do, to have a multivitamin as part of your daily routine, just to fill in any gaps that may or may not be there from your diet. Are nutrients like fats, proteins and carbohydrates, but we also have the much smaller nutrients that come into it. We all need in our bodies for all the processes that go on in our bodies, and these are the vitamins and minerals. And actually, we're very used to at medical school being heard about severe vitamin deficiencies, and everybody's going to have heard of things like scurvy as being the severe manifestations of mineral disease. But I think what we're starting to see is that actually other things that we may not have known about in the past are starting to become associated with poor health. I think we live in an age where we're overfed but often undernourished, and we're not always getting the minerals and vitamins that we need from our diet. And that can be due to eating processed foods, which are naturally very low in quality because they're trying to make them as cheaply as possible, through to how farming practices have changed. We know, for example, that we get far less magnesium from our salads these days than, for example, 50 years ago, when there was a lot more vitamins and minerals in the soil to be able to go into that salad when it grows. I think the most important thing is for people who are generally concerned about a potentially serious health condition, is to really not delay seeking help about that, and that actually, we'd rather you come in and have a chat with us and reassure you about something you're worried about, rather than to leave something until things have developed into a much more severe condition that we may not be able to treat at that point. So the simple message is, if you're worried, don't stay worried, come and see your GP.